Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this lovely Thursday morning. If you are here for the Fair Housing 101 training for rental professionals, you are in the right place. My name is Brianna Miranda, and today I will be presenting along with my colleague Lindsay Owens. We have a few housekeeping things to address before we get started. All attendees' audio is muted and our cameras are off. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube. For questions, please use the Q&A. There will be time at the end to answer some detailed questions. Questions that are put in the chat may be missed, so please use that Q&A feature through Zoom. We will take a break halfway through the presentation, so just be aware of that. Additionally, if to receive a certificate, each attendee must complete our evaluation survey. We will send a link, or we'll provide a link at the end. It should also be in your browser automatically. If you are attending as a group, make sure each person separately fills out the evaluation. Certificates are not guaranteed to those who do not complete the survey. And the deadline to complete it is Friday at 5 p.m. So tomorrow at 5 p.m. So please, please, please make sure you get that. As I said, we can't guarantee certificates if you do not complete it. Additionally, we did send out a handouts email yesterday. If you did not receive that, we have posted a link in the chat so you can download those handouts as well. So again, my name is Brianna Miranda, and I am one of two education outreach coordinators with the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan. And today I also have my colleague Lindsay Owens, who is also an education outreach coordinator. You can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and there is some of our contact information. So today we'll be going through, who we are, what is housing discrimination, what overviewing fair housing laws, looking at the protected classes, at the application of the laws, testing, the equal housing opportunity logo. We'll go over some questions and then we'll end the day. To start out and get everyone's brains turning, we're going to ask some questions and some polls. So the first one here is on a scale of 1 to 5, please rate your level of familiarity with fair housing. 1 being I'm new, 3 being I have some knowledge, and 5 knowing a lot about fair housing. Again, or sorry, not again, but all polls are anonymous and it's not required to get your certificate to participate. It's really just for us to understand, this one particularly is to understand your knowledge of fair housing, but also to just get your guys' brains turning, just some engagement as we do this webinar. I'll give about 20 seconds here. Again, this isn't required, but it just helps us know where everyone's at. Alrighty. So we have a mixed group today, which is really great. This is a 101, so we'll be going over the basics. So thank you for those that are the 5s and the 4s for attending again. We really appreciate you being here and being a part of our trainings. Okay, we have another one here to test your knowledge of the federal fair housing protections. So check all the protected classes under federal fair housing laws. Smokers, race, religion, sex, credit history, national origin, convicted felon, disability, adult with dependent children, and color. Then if you're attending as a group, you guys will just have to make a consensus on which answers you want to choose. Give folks about 30 seconds. Alrighty, getting your final responses in. I'm going to end the poll and share it. Okay, so it is mixed on what people think the federal fair protected classes are, which we will go over. So the federal protected classes are race, religion, sex, national origin, disability. Adult with dependent children is a fancy way of saying familial status, and color. So smokers are not protected. Credit history is not protected. Those with criminal history are not protected. Great. All right, and we have one more, which has three questions in it, and it's true and false. The first one, anyone can file a fair housing complaint, true or false. Maintenance staff cannot be held responsible for stating a preference for certain types of tenants under fair housing laws, true or false. A property manager has the right to inquire about whether opposite sex children under the age of 18 will have separate bedrooms, true or false. About 30 more seconds for those questions. Okay, I'm going to share the results. For the first one, I agree with 97% of you. It is true. Anyone can file a fair housing complaint, not just those that are experiencing housing discrimination, but property managers, maintenance staff, cleaning staff, anybody within the property can also submit a fair housing complaint. We have received cases where other property managers are monitoring the field and hearing about other companies that may be violating fair housing laws and letting us know. We will talk about this, but fair housing complaints can be submitted anonymously to our office. The second one, maintenance staff cannot be held responsible for stating a preference for certain types of tenants under fair housing laws. This is false. Maintenance staff can be held responsible. Anybody that is working for a property management company or in the housing process can be held responsible. Tenants can be as well. Uh, and then for the third one there, a property manager has the right to inquire about whether opposite sex children under the age of 18 will have separate bedrooms. I agree with 78% of you. It is false. Property managers do not have the right to inquire. This could be a familial status allegation. So thank you all for enduring that pop quiz for you this morning. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, who will talk about who we are.
Thank you so much, Bree. Like Bree said earlier, my name is Lindsay Owens, and I am another education and outreach coordinator here at the Fair Housing Center, West Michigan. And I'm going to share a little bit more about our organization and what we do before we get more into fair housing and responsibilities and best practices for rental professionals. So the Fair Housing Center West Michigan, or FHCWM, is a private nonprofit fair housing organization founded in 1980 out of a combined grassroots effort to desegregate schools and integrate neighborhoods. Our mission is to prevent and eliminate illegal housing discrimination, ensure equal housing opportunity, and promote inclusive communities. And we do this specifically by providing comprehensive fair housing services, including education, which is what you're experiencing right now with our presentation to rental professionals. But also we do outreach, research, advocacy, and enforcement in our service area around fair housing. A few disclaimers before we get into this training is that our organization doesn't have attorneys on staff, therefore we cannot provide legal advice. All the information and materials we're providing today are for educational purposes only. Another disclaimer is that all of the information in this presentation is current to the best of our knowledge, but it could change at any time. So just those are some things to keep in mind as we move forward. Like I said a few slides ago, one aspect of the work that FHCWM does is that we provide education. We provide education all across our community to different groups of people, including the housing industry, home seekers, advocates, and just the general public. We educate members of the housing industry about their responsibilities under fair housing laws, and we also provide education to the public about their fair housing rights. We really want to stress that without cooperation from the housing industry, we would not be able to work towards our mission. We really rely on the housing industry to police themselves and their personal commitment to fair housing. Another aspect of our work is that we do enforcement around fair housing. Enforcement involves taking in complaints and investigation, analyzing information, and if warranted, working towards resolutions. Ideally, enforcement would not be necessary, but sometimes the laws and education are not always enough to ensure equal housing opportunity in our communities. So that's the enforcement side of what we do. Sometimes with the name Fair Housing Center West Michigan, it can be a little bit confusing to people in the public about what our organization does and does not do. So here's a list of things that our organization does not do. So we do not address landlord, tenant law, or matters. We don't teach homebuyer classes or credit counseling. We don't work strictly on affordable housing issues. We don't handle building code and maintenance issues. We don't do foreclosure prevention, and we don't offer or refer housing. So those are some things that we do not do. Our organization receives funding from contracts with city, county, state, and federal governments to provide fair housing services across our service area. We also bring in funding through an annual membership drive. If you're interested, there's a link in the handouts on this slide to become a member of our organization. We also host an annual fair housing workshop series where we provide a lot of great resources to a range of different audiences about fair housing rights and responsibilities, mainly on upcoming topics in fair housing. We also do consulting and training and then special projects, and we also get some funding from senior millages. Here is a map and a list of some of the different fair housing centers in Michigan. We are all independent from one another, but we do collaborate and have a relationship with one another. Our service areas in the teal color covering West Michigan and all of the Upper Peninsula. And if you come to us and you're not in our service area, we would gladly direct you to the Fair Housing Center that can help you. So that was a little bit about our organization. We've mentioned the word fair housing a few times so far. Some of you might know what that means and some of you might not. Now we're going to dive into what it actually is. So fair housing is the right of individuals to obtain housing of their choice, free from discrimination based on protected classes under federal, state, and local fair housing laws. Fair housing protects against discrimination in housing transactions, such as rentals, sales, lending, and insurance. I like to think of protected classes as being similar to like characteristics or groups, things about a person. At the federal level, fair housing laws protect people from discrimination in housing because of race, color, religion, sex, disability status, familial status, and national origin. In case you all didn't know, color refers to skin color. Disability status includes both mental and physical disabilities. Familial status is the presence of children under the age of 18 in the home. And national origin is the country of an individual's birth or where their ancestors are from. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, has a set of rules called Equal Access Rules. These rules are a set of guidelines for HUD-funded properties and programs to promote equal access. These guidelines provide protections for marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and the composition of the family. These protections are not laws. They're not amendments to the Fair Housing Act, but they are enforceable guidelines for HUD-funded properties and programs. We'll get a little bit more into the equal access rule in a bit. At the state level, we have protections for marital status, age, an expanded definition of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and source of income and rental housing. Then at the local level, we have additional protections that vary based on where one lives, and we'll get a little bit more into that. When we think about illegal housing discrimination, we're really thinking about differences in housing because of a protected class. Under fair housing, differences because of a protected class in advertising, steering, eligibility criteria, applications, policies, terms, conditions, discounts, specials, and maintenance and access to amenities are illegal. Additionally, harassment, including intimidation and sexual harassment, is also illegal under fair housing. Fair housing covers a range of different what we call dwellings. So it covers apartments, houses, condos, housing construction sites, empty lots intended for housing, homeowner associations, mobile and manufactured home developments, insurance, rooming houses, transitional housing and homeless shelters, college residence halls, student housing, cooperatives, PHAs, a whole range of list of different types of housing and dwellings are covered. So likely, if you involve housing, you will be covered by fair housing law. According to the National Fair Housing Alliance, which is a broader fair housing advocacy organization in the United States, 83% of fair housing complaints take place in the rental process. So that's why it's extremely important that rental professionals get fair housing training and understand their fair housing obligations and responsibilities. In 2024, FHCWM received 168 allegations of housing discrimination in 142 cases. The top allegations were on the basis of disability status, followed by race and color, and national origin. Last year, 46% of FHCWM's cases happened in rentals and 31% were reasonable accommodations. So again, it's really important that rental professionals get this training on fair housing to understand their responsibilities under fair housing law. So why should this matter? Why should housing discrimination matter to rental professionals? Well, first, discrimination based on protected classes under federal, state, and local laws is illegal, and housing providers can be held liable for discrimination. But even more than that, illegal housing discrimination limits certain populations' ability to obtain housing and unnecessarily limits the housing market, which can have an impact on all of us. Housing providers can be found liable for illegal housing discrimination, regardless of whether they intended to discriminate or not. Ignorance is not a good defense when you haven't abided by fair housing laws. So now that we have given you a little bit of a grounding in what fair housing is, we're going to jump more into fair housing laws and kind of some of the history and what are current laws that housing providers need to think about. So the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was passed after the Civil War during the Reconstruction era, and it was the first Civil Rights Act in the United States. This act established that all people born in the United States, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of slavery or involuntary servitude, were entitled to the basic rights of citizenship. Specific rights included the right to purchase, lease, sell, hold, and convey real and personal property. The Civil Rights Act of 1870 prohibited discrimination by state officials in voter registration based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So under these Reconstruction Acts, discrimination based on race was absolutely prohibited. Unfortunately, enforcement of these laws was weak, and so that eventually led to the passing of more laws guaranteeing civil rights in our country. Now we are going to take some time to watch a video about the lead up of the passing of the Fair Housing Act.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip. But I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So tonight I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President. Yes, sir. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I was afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out. I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody can act on it. And we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
Of your presence, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them. At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
Fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
So, like the video detailed, 7 days after the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which also includes the Fair Housing Act, was passed. This act did not change protections under the Reconstruction Acts. At the time it was passed, the Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, and national origin. It made it unlawful to make, print, or publish any notice, statement, or advertisement of the sale or rental of housing that indicates any preference, limitation, or discrimination based on these protected classes. In 1974, the act was amended to add sex as a protected class, and in 1988, it was amended again to add disability status and familial status as protected classes. So now jumping into the state of Michigan, a state law was enacted similar to the Federal Fair Housing Act to include all of the federally protected classes as protected in our state. In Michigan, we also have the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, which includes protections for marital status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, source of income and rental housing, an expanded definition of race, which we'll talk a bit more about in the coming slides. Additionally, in Michigan, we have the Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act of 1976, which is similar to federal disability protections and puts a greater burden on landlords in the state to make reasonable accommodations and modifications for people with disabilities, which we'll also talk a bit more about. So some recent updates in Michigan. In 2023, Michigan expanded the definition of race under the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, or ELCRA, through the Crown Act, which stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. The Crown Act defines race to be inclusive of traits historically associated with race, including but not limited to hair texture and protective hairstyles. The Crown Act also added definitions of gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation to ELCRA. We'll talk a bit more about gender identity and sexual orientation in a bit. Additionally, in 2024, protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression went into effect in Michigan. In 2023, ELCRA was amended to add these protections. And we'll talk a bit more about that as well later on in the presentation. And then this year, source of income and rental housing protections went into place in Michigan on April 2nd. Source of income includes benefits or subsidy programs, including housing assistance, housing choice vouchers, public assistance, veterans benefits, Social Security, supplemental security income, and other programs administered by any federal, state, or local nonprofit entity. We will talk a bit more about source of income in a bit, but I'll leave you with some of this information off the bat. So under source of income protections, landlords are still allowed to require certain income amounts to rent a unit, but they can't specify the source of said income. That source of income needs to be legal and ongoing. There is an exemption for small landlords with fewer than 5 units in the state of Michigan. We will talk a bit more about that later. And housing agencies tasked with handling vouchers must approve applications within 30 days. It's a very brief overview of some of these recent law updates, but we will talk more about these in the next few hours. There are exemptions to fair housing laws if owners or a member of the owner's immediate family reside in one unit in a duplex and that that's the only property that they own. But regardless of exemptions to fair housing laws, all housing providers are prohibited from advertising or making statements in a discriminatory manner. We will talk a bit more about this later on when we talk about advertising. So at the local level, we have a range of protections based on where one lives and where one's property is located. In the Grand Rapids metro area, which our office is located in Grand Rapids, but we do serve many counties in West Michigan. In the metro area, genotype is protected in Grand Rapids. Height and weight is protected in East Grand Rapids, Kentwood, and Wyoming. And medical condition is protected in Grand Rapids. Do keep in mind that these protected classes apply to more than just housing. So that's why you're going to see something like genotype and medical condition. It might not be super common for that to occur in housing, but there's potentially cases based on it, but those might occur more in like a educational or healthcare context. Additionally, along the lakeshore, education is protected in Holland, and then height and weight are protected in Muskegon Heights. In Traverse City, height and weight are protected. And then our service area doesn't cover Ann Arbor. And then the following slide will be on Kalamazoo. But there are a range of protected classes in both of these areas. And so we just want to stress that depending on where your property is located, including like a street away from a municipal border, that could really change if there are additional local protections in your area. So that's something you want to keep in mind and look out for. Here are some resources, Unicode and the legal library linked right here. If you have questions, you can reach out to our organization to figure out what additional local protections might apply to your properties. Additionally, just something to keep in mind that we're seeing across Michigan are fair chance ordinances, which focus on protections for people with criminal records. They've been passed in Ann Arbor, Detroit, Jackson, and Kalamazoo. Fair chance legislation has been introduced in state legislatures a few times in Michigan. So this is just something to be aware of. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. Let's see. So the poll is, do you know if your property receives any federal funding? Because that will apply to the next section of what we're talking about. Answers are coming in really quickly. I'll give about 45, 30 more seconds to answer. About 10 more seconds. It looks like a lot of people have answered so far. Okay, I will end the poll. Share the results. So it looks like a good amount of you are federally funded. So that's great that you're attending today. And some of you are unsure. The next section of information has some information specific to people who are receiving federal funding. But regardless, some of this is the same in Michigan, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So I will stop sharing. Okay, so we mentioned a bit earlier that the equal access rule was on the protected class slide. The equal access rule is a series of 3 separate regulations for HUD-funded properties and programs. It includes the HUD programs EAR in 2012, the CPD programs EAR in 2016, and the Native American and Native Hawaiian programs EAR in 2016 as well. The equal access rule requires equal access to HUD housing programs without regard to a person's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. It also has an expanded definition of family. Something to note is that Michigan's Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act also prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and marital status. So regardless of whether you receive HUD funding or not, these protections still apply in the state of Michigan. The Equal Access Rule is not a law or an amendment to the Fair Housing Act. Rather, it's a rule that applies to HUD-funded programs and properties. More specifically, we're going to dive into the first 2 rules of the Equal Access Rule. So in 2012, the Equal Access Rule prohibits HUD-funded programs from discriminating based on the composition of the family, age of family members, disability status of family members, marital status, and actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. The term family includes, but it's not limited to, any group of people presenting for assistance together who identify themselves as a family. So if someone comes to you and identifies themselves as a family, they must be served together. Just a note that under HUD's homeless program, to distinguish a family from an individual, the household must include a child under the age of 18. This equal access rule in 2012 applies to all HUD housing programs, including Section 8, housing choice vouchers, CDBGs, public housing, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS, supportive housing for elderly and persons with a disability, Kinevento, FHA insured loans, and many others. Now moving to the rule that was put into place in 2016. This equal access rule, in accordance with an individual's gender identity and community planning and development programs rule, really addresses how transgender and gender non-conforming individuals should be accommodated in temporary emergency shelters and similar HUD-funded programs. The rule states that providers that operate single-sex projects using funds awarded through HUD CPD are required to provide all individuals, including transgender individuals and other individuals who do not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth, with access to programs, benefits, services, and accommodations in accordance with their gender identity, without subjecting them to intrusive questioning or asking them to provide documentation. This rule applies to HUD's community planning and development programs, including COC-funded agencies, Emergency Solutions Grant, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS, shelter plus care, supportive housing programs, and any other HUD-assisted program. This rule impacts admissions, occupancy, and operating policies and procedures of funded programs, and it also applies to recipients, sub-recipients, owners, operators, managers, and providers, including volunteers and contracted workers. Now jumping into another act that housing providers should know about is the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. VAWA provides protections for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Domestic violence cases have been successfully filed under the gender sex protection of the Fair Housing Act. Victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking cannot be denied admission or federal rental assistance just because they are or have been a victim or threatened victim. They cannot be evicted or lose federal rental assistance just because they are a victim or have been a threatened victim. They cannot be denied admission or rental assistance, evicted, or lose their subsidy for reasons related to abuse, such as bad credit history and criminal history. VAWA applies to those who are applying for or are tenants in any of these programs. This is a long list, but it includes public housing, Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, low-income housing tax credit, and many others. VAWA requires that communities honor abuse protection orders and other court orders that address access to or control of the unit. VAWA also requires that communities need to inform individuals of their rights under VAWA and include that info in their lease agreements. In cases where both the victim and the perpetrator are parties to the lease, the law permits the community to bifurcate the lease in order to evict the perpetrator and allow the victim to remain housed. Linked here is MISHDA's webpage on VAWA for you to learn a bit more. There are some things that housing providers should not do when it comes to domestic violence. They should not deny admission based on individual status as a victim of domestic violence. They should not evict a victim of domestic violence based on an incident of actual or threatened violence. They should not terminate a lease based on criminal activity directly related to domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking, unless the community can demonstrate an actual or imminent threat to other tenants or those employed at or providing services to the property. Some things housing providers can do is they can assist victims of domestic violence by making sure their properties are well lit, safe, and secure. They can complete repairs that pose safety issues in a timely manner. They can acknowledge domestic violence protection orders and help to enforce them. They can exclude the violent person from the premises. They can assist in the pressing of criminal charges. A best practice for housing providers is that they should not publish victims' addresses in newsletters or give out information to anyone without a release from the tenant. And then also just recognizing that domestic violence is not a lease violation. Some other laws to be aware of, for housing providers to be aware of, are Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Housing for Older Persons Act, or HOPA. Lastly, in this section about laws, we want to note that the only groups specifically listed in federal, state, and local fair housing laws enjoy protections under the laws. So all other groups of people are not protected, who are not listed in fair housing laws. So here in our service area, things like bad credit, past criminal history, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and tattoos are not protected, but they may be protected in other areas as well. So now that we've covered the laws section, we're going to get a bit more into some of the things we've already talked about in a bit more depth. So I'm going to pass it off to Bree to talk about advertising.
Excuse me. Thanks so much, Lindsay. That was a great overview of the laws. As Lindsay mentioned, now we're going to dive into advertising. And to start off, we're going to test your brain on an advertising poll. A newspaper or online ad that describes the type of person a landlord wants to rent to is acceptable under fair housing laws. True or false? You guys are quick to respond. That's great. I'll give 30 more seconds, 30 to 40 more seconds. So you guys are quick to the draw there. All right, about 10 seconds. Get your answers in. Alrighty. I'm going to share the results here. I agree with 93% of you. That is false. Under advertising, it is really a best practice to describe the property and not the people. So great job on that one. So the Fair Housing Act does call out advertising. It's Section 804. So we did link the Fair Housing Act there for you. It is broad and includes not only promotional materials, but also verbal statements made. And so that language right there is to make, print, or publish, or cause to be made. Some potential statements that have fair housing risk, that these are actual cases. These are things that people have said. This home would be ideal for an elderly couple, perfect for one adult, enough space for a hardworking downtown couple, or awesome spot for one person. Ideal for two singles or a married couple, looking for people preferably over 45. All these statements would have a familial status allegation to them, as it's really calling out any grouping of people that doesn't include children. Here are some more that we have seen for 1 or 2 people or a couple with a max of 2 children, ideal for a college student or a single person, great for single person or retired couple. You must be clean, no drugs, no criminal history. If you feel you qualify, please respond with your brief description of yourself, race, and age, and a recent picture of you. That last one was posted on Craigslist and did become a case. So you can, look that up if you're interested. But again, all of these, again, are really talking about the type of person that a housing provider wants to rent to, and there is a lot of risk with doing so. Here's another advertisement that was put in a paper. I want you to read it over a little bit, and I just think about what you are seeing or understanding about the property. What does the property have that you're interested in? This, as you read it, not only does this advertisement have phrases and words that have fair housing risk with them, but it does not tell you about the property. There's a lot of connection to different protections like national origin or race. When thinking about advertising, it's really, really important to focus on the property rather than the people. This instance is a really dramatic, I would say, a really bad one. I would say it's not a good business. Good for business either, because as a renter myself, as I'm reading this, I have no idea if I want to live here. Does it have 2-bedroom units? Is it studio apartments? Are they single family homes? I have no idea. Also, the Yoda and the eggs is also very confusing. Lindsay and I were actually talking about this yesterday, and it's a really silly ad. And then thinking about human models, when you're using human models, it's really important that it should focus on diversity of people and groups. If your human models only reflect certain groups, it may discourage people from applying or believing they can't live there. If you are going to use human models, it should be representative of everyone. Non-representative advertisements can open up a housing provider to fair housing risk. So really, the better option would not be using human models, but as folks learn in marketing, we're drawn to seeing faces and people. So that is a common way to advertise. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at your advertisements. Notice, are you seeing everyone represented in them? Does it look like, if somebody looks at that, can they think, oh, I could live there if they look different than those people? So this is an example of some effective advertising, some good advertising. For those, as Lindsay asked that first question or that poll in their section, if you receive federal funding, it's just really important to know that, because it opens you up to other laws or things that you have to be more aware of. So for affirmative fair housing marketing, many federal or state funded programs have an obligation to create and implement a affirmatively fair housing marketing plan. MSHDA specifically requires that all MSHDA finance developments maintain a current approved plan. And the plan is a marketing strategy that is designed to attract people of all groups, regardless of the protected classes, to be marketed to. So we have linked what that affirmative fair housing marketing requirements are. They also have a fact sheet we have linked there. And then Liz did a joint training with the Fair Housing Center of Metro Detroit, which you can find the link there if you want to learn more about affirmatively fair housing marketing. So now moving into criminal background, as Lindsay mentioned, this is not a protected class. However, having a criminal record is very common. So 1/3 of our population has some sort of criminal record. So this impacts a lot of people. So HUD has put out some guidance to really address it, because it is a common issue, a common theme among folks that are trying to apply to housing. So there's some different guidance here. In 2015, HUD put out guidance that is specific for public housing authorities. And then there's additional guidance for the private market. You can find those all linked there. So we're going to go over the 2022 HUD guidance, which really looks at how to screen folks that have criminal records. And there's three ways that excluding individuals from housing may be illegal, based on three theories of liability, it's called. So meaning to discriminate, discriminatory intent, discriminatory effects. So neutral policies that have negative impacts on a protected class. And then the third one is refusing to make reasonable accommodations. And I know we've thrown around that word reasonable accommodations and modifications a couple times in the beginning of this presentation. We will cover that when we go over the specific protected classes shortly. Or after the break, really. Additionally, the 2022 guidance looks at the use of criminal records. So there was guidance that really stated that criminal history is not a good predictor of housing success. And it does recommend that housing providers consider not using criminal history to screen tenants. The memo reviews the 2016 principles, but also highlights the need to be aware of ways in which policies and practices can violate fair housing. It also has some tips on for those conducting investigations relating to the criminal background screening and some best practices as well. So some examples that it lists is for disparate treatment. So not advertising to all applicants of the policy, not applying the policy to all, rejecting comparably qualified applicants based on their criminal record. So I think there's going to be an example in the next slide, but based on race, discouraging some people and encouraging others. So again, it's that difference in treatment and not treating everyone and giving everyone the same information. So going back to like the not comparable, so evicting somebody, a Black tenant who's convicted of a crime, but not evicting the white tenant who was convicted of a similar crime. The only difference there is the race. After learning that an applicant was previously homeless and hospitalized for treatment of a mental health condition, a management company departed from its standard procedures and conducted a criminal background screening. So again, if you're going away from your standard procedures and there's a protected class involved, it really opens you up to fair housing risk. There was additional guidance put out in 2024 on really how to evaluate and screen folks in this new world of AI and technology. So the two guidances that came out was a tenant screening and then an advertising through online platforms using targeted ads. And those HUD links are there. We're going to go over the screening one as is more applicable to you as rental housing providers. So this screening does look at how tenant screening services can screen for applicants in a non-discriminatory way and has some best practices. And it includes fair housing issues that are seen in this process and how housing providers and the screening companies can avoid these discriminatory screenings. You can find these 6 kind of steps to ensure that you're screening non-discriminatory. It's on pages 11 through 15. Again, those are linked in your slides. We're really going to briefly go over them. Our 201 and our 301 does dive deeper into this. So for the first one, it suggests, choose relevant screening criteria, use accurate records, make sure you're following the screening policy, be transparent with applicants, let them know why they were denied or what came up on what came up when they, in the screening platform. Allow applicants to challenge negative information and let them tell you if they have information that suggests it's not them, or there's new information or information that can be used to say that they are a good tenant. And then if you are using these different screening third-party platforms, make sure you're designing and testing it for fair housing compliance. Even though it's not your platform, it is your platform because you're utilizing it. So it's really the liability does fall back on you if that platform is being discriminatory. It has some additional considerations where we see unjustified discriminatory effect on protected classes, particularly race, color, and national origin, people with disabilities, women, families with children, and survivors of domestic violence. Looking at credit history, eviction history, and criminal records. Really, it kind of questions, like with credit history, what are we trying to get at? In the end, you're really just looking at, are they going to pay their rent? Is there another way you can see if that they do that? Another alternative, would to do some income verification. And then looking at eviction history, are you trying to know about the eviction, to see if they're a good tenant? What was the eviction for? Why? When? What were the surrounding circumstances? How long ago was it? Do the circumstances no longer apply? Maybe they had some trouble with their job, or COVID hit in 2020. A lot of people were facing different financial issues. So kind of thinking about the circumstances that may be surrounding the eviction, if that applies. And then again, looking at criminal records as we are discussing. So best practices that were put out by HUD, consider not using criminal history to screen tenants, or really seeing if folks can fit your other criteria. Check state and local laws that may limit the ability to run criminal background checks. Check for any applicable program requirements, regulations, or restrictions. Avoid third-party screening companies that use biased algorithms. It has been shown through much research that algorithms we as humans have biases, and we are building these algorithms. So our biases have been found to be in these algorithms. So just, again, that's why testing your programs and making sure they are fair housing compliant is important. And then treat comparable criminal history similarly. Additionally, have a written criminal background screening policy that is available to everyone. Delay that criminal history until you verify the other qualifications. Before denying an applicant or evicting a resident, provide them the criminal record and give them the opportunity to explain the circumstances or correct any wrong information. Only evict for criminal activity as a last resort and after you've done an individualized assessment. So that individualized assessment is, just reviewing the circumstances, reviewing what the criminal activity is for. Never evict a person or a family because they're victims of the crime. Do not ban a tenant's guest from visiting based on the guest's criminal involvement. And then document any screening completed, the circumstances considered, and decisions made. Throughout this, you will hear us talk about documentation, and documentation is really important to show, because if an allegation comes forward, it falls back on you to show what you did and what you didn't do, to rectify a situation or didn't rectify a situation. Some additional best practices when it comes to policies, really consider the nature of the criminal background, the severity. Is it a felony or is it a misdemeanor? How long ago was it? Case law has shown 5 to 7 years as a look back period. Anything longer could put you up for risk. Ensure a policy can be justified with evidence to show it actually, you're actually trying to protect your residents and the property. With that same line, look at criminal conduct that indicates a risk to resident safety and property. The crimes that are, homicides or arson or assault, compared to crimes that don't, like gambling or prostitution, tax crimes, cyber crimes, things like that really don't show a risk to the people or the property. And it also calls out to avoid automatic denials or blanket bans. Any policies that say no felonies, just a blanket no felonies allowed, that really opens you up to fair housing risk. And it does say to avoid consideration of arrests. It should be actual convictions. Consider the amount of time that has passed. Is this 20 years ago? Do they show that they no longer have the circumstances around why that criminal conduct came? So that's, doing that individualized assessment. Look at the information, consider the circumstances, the age of the individual. Were they a 17-year-old young person that didn't really know right from wrong, and now they're a 35-year-old person that has a job and really has maintained good tenant history? Look at those types of things. Is there rehabilitation efforts? It really, again, should be that individualized assessment. And then consider any requests for reasonable accommodations on the basis of disability. So as we will talk about, reasonable accommodations are a change in policy for a person with a disability. So if a criminal history is related to a disability, a person can request a reasonable accommodation to your policy, as if they are seeking treatment now and the circumstances no longer apply to why that conduct previously happened. When it comes to public housing authorities, HUD guidance calls out that property managers of these units must deny admission if anyone has been convicted of manufacturing methamphetamines or on federally assisted properties, anyone who is on the lifetime register for sex offenses, current users of illegal drugs, anyone within the last 3 years who has been evicted from federal housing for drug-related activity, unless there's been rehabilitation or the circumstances no longer exist. Some may consider, so it's not required to be considered, drug-related crimes, violent criminal history, other criminal activity that would adversely affect the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment. Public housing authorities and their owners are not required to have a one-strike policy. This is something that has just come up as, oh, I'm required to. That is, but that isn't the case. Public housing authorities have the discretion to deny, evict, or terminate based on certain types of criminal history, the seriousness, the effect of the entire household, but not those involved, any steps taken by the leaseholder to prevent it or mitigate it, and then the participation in rehabilitation programs. So really, again, just evaluating all the information that you have surrounding the criminal history. And then for low-income housing tax credits, there is a handbook that we have linked, but the handbook outlines criminal background screening and the following language you can find on pages 4 through 18. But owners must establish written screening criteria to prohibit the admission of certain individuals who have engaged in drug-related behavior or are subject to the Lifetime Sex Offender Registry Program. And again, those who abuse or have a pattern of abuse of alcohol that interferes with everyone's health, safety, and peaceful enjoyment of the premises. Owners may choose to expand those requirements. So that is linked there for those that receive the low-income housing tax credits. So that takes us, we are just about halfway through this presentation. So we are going to take a 10-minute break and then go through the protected classes. So everyone can come back around 10:19. That would be great. So go get some coffee, take a bathroom break, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thanks. This is your verbal warning to get back to your screen. I'm going to take some water and then I'll resume. We'll start back up. Okay, I hope that was a good 10-minute break. We're going to dive back into the content where we'll be diving into the protected classes a little bit more. So race refers to people distinguished by socially significant perceived physical characteristics, which can include hair texture, skin color, eye shape, or other differences. Color refers to a person's skin color. So if somebody is lighter or darker, etc. So that is why they're two different protected classes. National origin refers to one's country of origin or an individual's birth or where someone's ancestors originated from. So this includes birthplace, ethnicity, ancestry, culture, accent, spoken language, appearance that is associated with a specific nationality, and others. Additionally, the protection is for those that, you know, present as a race, but also the perception of someone's race, color, or national origin is also protected under law. So assuming somebody is a race, national origin, or a specific color, assuming that of them and then denying them because of that is also protected under law. There was a case that was in Michigan where an older gentleman, a Black gentleman, was applying for senior housing. He was applying to the senior housing because it was closer to the hospital where he received treatment. And he, was very friendly with the leasing staff. The leasing staff knew about him. They knew that he was from California and that he was an engineer. They knew everything about him. They talked constantly because he would call. He was on the wait list. So, he would call and check in all the time. And, it was very friendly conversation. One day when he was coming home, his neighbor was moving out and she was a white woman. And he was like, "Oh, where are you moving to?" And she was like, "ABC Apartments." And he was like, "Oh my gosh, no way. I'm on the wait list there. How long have you been waiting?" And she was like, "Oh, 3 months." And he had been on the wait list for 7 years. So during that time, his health did decline, and it was brought to a case was brought up against this place, and it was found that they were maintaining separate wait lists based on race. Unfortunately, this older gentleman did pass away in the time during that time. So his estate is pursuing the case. But it kind of just mirrors the fact that folks can be treated kindly up front, but there could be discrimination happening on the back end of things. Maintaining a wait list based on race is prohibited under law, so that, that case is moving forward. When looking at national origin and limited English proficiency, which I'll refer to as LEP, that refers to a person's limited ability to read, speak, or understand English. It is not a protected class, but housing providers are prohibited from using LEP selectively based on a protected class or as a pretext for discrimination. There is a connection between LEP and national origin. Lack of English proficiency can be a proxy for national origin. Practices that restrict access to housing on the basis of LEP can have a discriminatory effect on national origin, race, or other protected characteristics, even when there is no intent to discriminate. So having policies that say must speak English to live here, or folks, one person must speak English, that can have discriminatory intent, sorry, it has a discriminatory effect, even if you didn't have an intent to discriminate. And courts have recognized that an individual's primary language generally flows from their national origin. So it's just important to be thinking about these things. And here are some suspected practices, have some fair housing risk to them. Having, again, those statements, all tenants must speak English, turning away applicants who are not fluent in English, bans on tenants speaking non-English languages on the property, refusing to work with people who speak a certain language, but working with others who speak different languages. So again, that difference in treatment, treating someone differently because they speak English with an accent, or targeting individuals for unfair or illegal housing related services based on language. This portion of LEP is covered in our other 201 and 301 trainings. So we're going to move into sex and gender. So for sex and gender, there's no preference on the basis of sex, should be stated. Gender preference language can only be used in advertising when it is a roommate situation or people that are sharing communal spaces, so living spaces, so a kitchen or a bathroom. That's the only time that a gender preference can be used. Otherwise, there should be no preferences stated for folks. Sometimes we see cases where folks don't want to rent to women because they won't maintain the lawn as well. So having those biases again can really open up for housing allocations. Sorry if you hear those sirens. Moving into this disability status, disability is broadly defined and covers mental and physical disabilities. It also is defined as a physical or mental impairment that limits a major life activity, a record of having such an impairment, or being regarded as having such impairment. So again, the protections cover you if somebody assumes you have a disability, even if you don't. Major life activity is also broadly construed, and it includes really anything that affects your physical, mental, or social activities, sleeping, walking, bathing, eating, breathing, driving, hearing, and seeing. We have many cases, as this is our number one allegation of discrimination. However, kind of thinking about the, assuming somebody has a disability and then denying them anyways. There was a case where a gentleman who he was a veteran and he had a physical disability, and he was talking with a leasing agent about his time overseas and about how his injury came to be, and his treatment, and just gabbing away about it. He was then denied because the leasing agent assumed that he had PTSD, and they didn't want to deal with that. He had not been diagnosed with PTSD, but the leasing agent made an assumption that he was a veteran, so he would have PTSD, and what she knows about PTSD could be violent behaviors, things like that. Again, assuming he had a disability that he did not have, and then denying him. That is protected under fair housing. For disability, it is allowed to say, no smoking or no drinking on the property, or other similar behaviors, but it should not identify a person with a health condition. So saying no drinkers or no smokers would open you up to fair housing risk rather than saying no drinking, no smoking. However, it is important to understand that alcoholism and drug addiction can be a disability under fair housing law. However, but the current use of drugs and alcohol is not protected. So if somebody has a history of it and they're being treated for it, that cannot be a factor. So you can't say no alcoholics. That again would go again to that, like describing the, we shouldn't be describing the people. But again, that is also protected under fair disability protections. So there are a couple ways that people with disabilities can enjoy their housing. One way is reasonable accommodation, which is a change in rule, policy, procedure, or service for a person with a disability to have that equal access and enjoyment of their housing. Some example, and a very common one we see, is waiving a no pet policy for a person with a disability to have a assistance animal, or assigning a designated accessible parking space compared to the, first come, first serve type of parking. If a person with a disability has a limited ability to walk, they may not have a visible disability and have a placard or something of that sort. They may have asthma, or they may have a heart condition that you cannot see, and they could request a designated accessible parking space to be closer to their unit's entrance based on their disability. And these are separate from the the spots that are designated under the Americans with Disabilities Act. These are separate. Would be a reasonable accommodation. Generally, reasonable accommodations are the responsibility of the housing provider, as they are your rules and policies. So you have to accommodate that person and adjust that policy based on their disability. We have linked the Joint HUD and Department of Justice joint statement on reasonable accommodations. This is a really great document because it's like a frequently asked kind of questions. There are a lot of questions that have the response. So oftentimes when people ask us questions on reasonable accommodations, we will send this over, as there are some answers to that. So just another resource for you when evaluating accommodations. When you're processing reasonable accommodations, these are the things to be thinking about. What is the existing policy? How does this differ? What documentation is needed? Does the person have a visible disability? If they have a visible disability, is documentation needed? Not necessarily. When or how does the policy get changed? But all of it would require, homework and legwork to do. It is something that if we are in your service area, that is something that we can help with. So if you have some of those questions, we can help you talk through them. But again, we have no attorneys on staff, so we cannot provide legal advice, but we can help you understand the law and what it says. For reasonable modifications, this is different. This is a structural change or a physical change to, the housing or the unit for the person to have access. A very common example would be a ramp to a building's entrance. Some other ones would be, grab bars in the shower, a handle lever versus a doorknob. Those have different uses with people with disabilities. For the most part, they have to be allowed. If you receive federal financial assistance, so again, thinking back to that poll question, if you receive it, this is why it's important. Again, there are some additional steps that may have to be taken. So if you receive federal financial assistance, these structural changes are considered accommodations, and they must be paid for by the housing provider. Generally, if it is private housing, the tenant pays, but if it's federally funded, the housing provider pays. Again, there's another joint statement linked there for reasonable modifications, similar to the accommodations, but addresses modifications. When processing modifications, these are some things to bring into question. Who's going to be using it? Would it be everyone or just the specific person? Is there any issues, any code compliance issues that you may have to evaluate? Do you need documentation? Do you need plans or drawings of it? You can request as a housing provider that it be done in a workman-like manner. So that is something that can be requested from you. Thinking about who pays for it. Again, if it's private housing, generally the tenant pays, but if it's federally funded housing, the housing provider. But again, look at the different laws that may apply. Thinking about what happens when the tenant moves out. Is it something that you'll just keep as part of the housing? Would that be then required by the tenant to pay for it? Evaluating these types of things. Again, all of it requires homework. We can help if you are in our service area. We do have a guidebook that has a sample response form. I also provided or also in the handouts was provided a reasonable modification and accommodation sample response form. We also have that in Spanish. If you are interested in receiving that, just reach out to us, as well as the guidebook. Tenants can request modifications and accommodations at any time. It does not have to be at the beginning of their lease. As we exist in this world, our abilities may change. Tenants with unobservable disabilities or disability-based needs can be asked to provide documentation on why the change is needed. Tenants can request more than one accommodation or modification as well. Request must not create an unreasonable burden on the housing provider, such as not getting paid rent. Again, these are things that we can help you with, so you can definitely reach out to us, and we have a guidebook that covers it. So looking at an example here, this is a really great example. It's clearly marked. There is a curb cut here. Again, the signage is really great, and that, it really shows you that these are spaces that are accessible for folks. And here's a bad example. That was a case. It was actually submitted in court. The judge did not like that, but a person just popped a sign on stairs. It feels like a really bad joke to me. So that would be not a good example, and that is not accessible. So moving into a hot topic, we're briefly going to go into this. If you are interested in learning more about assistance animals, we do have a training posted on our YouTube where you can watch that. So we're just going to go over some high-level things. In 2020, HUD did put out a guidance on assistance animals. It replaces the prior guidance in 2013. It does not address Section 504 of the American Disabilities Act. It should be utilized with that HUD and DOJ joint statement on reasonable accommodations. If you granted accommodations prior to 2020 for assistance animals, do not reassess those requests. And it also has another section that can be used separately to educate residents and tenants on documentation, which we did provide as a handout. The guidance discusses that there are two types of assistance animals. So assistance animals is the umbrella term, and then there are two types of assistance animals. The first one is service animals. Those are individually trained animals, oftentimes a dog, and those are the ones that are allowed in public spaces. The second, though, is a support animal. It's a trained or untrained animals that provide work or do work, perform tasks, assistance, provide therapeutic emotional support for individuals with disabilities. So these are often, just covered under the Fair Housing Act. The guidance walks providers through a series of questions. It does start with, the first question is this animal a dog? Because it really wants to get to if it's a service animal or not. So it briefly discussed service animals, and then it transitions to the support animals, which is the bulk of the guidance. It incorporates information you already may know about the person's disability or their disability-related needs. So utilizing that knowledge as you go through the guidance is important. We also created a resource guide in response to that because it is a hefty document. So we do recognize that. So this resource guide kind of hits on some of those hot topics that come out of that. However, it is really important to go through that guidance. It is like a yes, no type of document. So if this, then this, choose your own adventure with assistance animals. The guidance for assistance animals discusses that no fees or deposits are allowed. Assistance animals are not subject to pet rules. Housing providers cannot limit the breed or size of the support animal or the dog for service animals. However, no fees or deposits on the front end. However, if your usual practice is to charge for damage at the end of the lease or at lease renewal, whatever your standard practice is, that can still be done. You, as a housing provider, you can refuse a reasonable accommodation if the animal poses a direct threat, and you have documentation of that. And if that direct threat cannot be eliminated or reduced to an acceptable level, through different ways that the individual can control it. So if, it works, you have to work with the person on really reducing or eliminating that action if it is a threatening action. So if the animal is, just barking at people, but it's, it seems like a threat, maybe a muzzle is an option. Really working through that person to make sure that, it isn't just get rid of the animal. Animals are a responsibility of the tenant, and the guidance does address that. It is their responsibility to feed, maintain, care, and control of the animal. However, they can do this with assistance of other people. So we did provide additionally a sample assistance animal policy. So if you do allow pets and have a pet policy, it is really, really important to have an additional policy that holds folks accountable with assistance animals to, maintaining and taking care of and control of their animal. Additionally, the guidance addresses that a person can have more than one animal. However, there may need to be supporting documentation to say what the disability related need is for animal A versus animal B. What is the difference of use of them? Additionally, if there are multiple people in the home, each person could ask for their own assistance animal. Housing providers cannot require a specific form or process, including the guidance. So all of our information that we provide, you can provide to the tenant to educate them. However, you cannot require them to use that specific, in part of our resource guide, we have a sample letter and we have a sample policy. You can provide that as an example, but you cannot require that to be used. Additionally, you cannot require detailed medical information. The guidance does call out that a housing provider must respond within 10 days of receiving a reasonable accommodation request for assistance animals. And then again, pet rules do not apply. This is very apparent within the guidance. When looking at documentation, a housing provider is entitled to obtain information that is necessary to evaluate if the reasonable accommodation or modification is necessary because of a disability, but only if the disability is not known or obvious, and or the disability related need is not readily apparent or otherwise known to you. So when somebody requests a reasonable accommodation or modification, you may have to take a step back and think, okay, what do we already know? What do we already know about this person? Okay, we see that this person is utilizing a wheelchair. So a ramp, the disability related need is kind of otherwise known to you or apparent. However, if the person, as I mentioned, the other one has, or when I talked about the parking, you can't see a heart condition, but you may know about the condition already if they've already requested other accommodations or modifications. So really evaluating what information do you already have and what information do you need to make this, to go through with this request. If the disability is not obvious, what kinds of information can you request? What do you still need to know? Generally, you need confirmation that one, a person has a disability defined by law, and two, that they have a disability related need. That's really all the information you need in really at first to say, this can be approved or not. The approval or denial of a request depends on the circumstances, and it needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Again, document every action taken, every step taken, every information that's provided back and forth. And then it's also important to keep all information confidential. As a note, people with disabilities usually have the most accurate knowledge about their limitations posed by their disability. So it's really important to, HUD calls it an interactive process, to really work with the person with a disability to work with them on what they need and what can be done. But you can assess for reasonableness. Is there an undue financial or administrative burden? Can you show that there's an undue financial or administrative burden? Would the accommodation fundamentally alter the nature of the provider's operations? Is this person requesting you to take them to and from their medical appointments because they can't drive due to a disability? You don't do that already, so that would require you to hire someone, get a bus, figure out, timing, things that are not a part of your operation. If the original request is found to be unreasonable, however, you must provide alternatives that'll effectively meet their needs or work with them to find alternatives that meet their needs. Again, it's working with that person to see what would best work for them as a person with a disability. Before I throw it back to Lindsay, I know disability is a hot topic, so I want to pause for any questions that folks may have.
Yeah, we have a range of different questions. I think some of them have been answered during the presentation, but I'll just ask them so we can clarify that answer again. So the first question is, what if the person is in a wheelchair and needs the cupboard to be made shorter, counter, and lower upper cabinets?
Yeah, you would need to assess the situation, what can be done and what can't be done, and work with that person. If it is an undue financial or administrative burden, is there another alternative that can be done for that person?
Great. The next question is, how many ESAs can a person have per medical letter?
Yeah, it depends. So the letter has to address why each animal is needed. So a person can request, as many animals as needed by their disability. If there are local or state restrictions that to how many animals, usually local, can be in a unit or whatnot, the person would then have to provide that documentation to the locality to receive an accommodation to their ordinance. However, it depends on what is needed and what their medical professional says. Healthcare professional says they need.
Another question we received is, if previous landlord states that the ESA damaged property or owner failed to take care of ESA properly, can you deny based on that person perspective?
It depends. I think you would have to take all of the information you received and evaluate that, talk with the person about it. Again, if your standard procedure is to accept a security deposit and take out that damage in the back end, you can do that.
And just a note based on some of the questions I'm seeing is that the purpose of our presentation today is to provide education. So if you have legal questions, we're not the people who can give you those answers. You need to talk to your lawyers. We can just provide you with the best guidance that we know of coming from the powers that be. So another question is, what happens if a member has a dog as a support animal but does not take proper care of letting the dog out to go to the bathroom, and it continues to go to the bathroom in the home? I think we touched on that with the last question, but
Yeah, that's why it's really important to have that assistance animal policy in place to really hold that person accountable to taking care of that animal. That still is a responsibility that the guidance outlines. So addressing that with the tenant, letting them, if they're not taking proper care of the animal, what may be a barrier in doing so? Is there another accommodation that could be made? But as the guidance says, that ability to take care of the animal and control of the animal can be done with assistance. So it could be like educating that person on that information. But again, having that assistance animal policy would make that apparent from the get-go. So if you don't already have it, put it in place and then make everyone aware of it. And kind of that is like your starting A, because if you don't have that information in place, you can't really hold anyone accountable to that information.
We have another question, kind of a statement. Tenants do not have to show medical assistance for an assistance animal. I think that's a question.
They have to show the disability related need. So I'm not sure what the question is there, but the person in their documentation, or if it's known or obvious, they essentially, do you know if they're a person with a disability? And what is the disability related need for what they're requesting?
Another question we received is, what about when the healthcare provider's documentation, in parentheses, in a case when a disability is not open and obvious and doesn't receive SSI, is a letter that says the animal is recommended rather than saying the animal is required to accommodate the resident's health condition?
Yeah, we have some information that can help educate healthcare providers as well. You can find it on our website, or you can reach out to us to get that information. But it may be a case of educating the tenant and the healthcare provider on uh, on documentation. However, if it is, if it's saying there's a disability related need there, it's not strong language, but if there's a disability related need and a disability called out, the guidance is pretty clear that should be utilized in making your acceptance or denial.
We have quite a few more questions, but I think we have time. There's another question. Is there a specification on the species, I think is what it's saying, of animals for the service or support animal?
If it is a animal commonly held in the household, or a domesticated animal, the letter does not need to say, they need trying to think of a specific animal. They need a Chihuahua, or if it's a commonly kept animal, there's no need. It just needs to say that this person has this disability related need for an assistance animal. So it doesn't have to be very specific. But if it is a unique animal that's not commonly kept in the household, so if it is a monkey or a barnyard animal, then the disability related need does need to be tied to the type of animal.
Another question, what is the policy for service/emotional support animals for visitors? I have issues with visitors bringing the animal and claim they are service or support animals.
Yeah, the information that we have received from the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, who is the enforcement agency of the state, has said that emotional service animals and service animals must be allowed for guests.
Few more questions here. One of them is, what do I do for a resident that needs a ramp, but due to the location of the unit, the contractors cannot accommodate for them?
Yeah, so again, that would be looking at some alternatives. If there is no way for the ramp to be safely built, is there another location that would work? If not, then what other accommodations can be made? That may be that there is a unit transfer that is needed, or letting the person out of their lease penalty free. Just working with that person and educating them on what the restrictions are. There are certain ways that a ramp has to be built, and just letting them know it cannot fit in this space. But again, it's just working through that with them.
Another question is, I think this is concerning an ESA, or an emotional support animal. City of apartment community has a breed ban. Does the prospect have to get city approval?
It depends. If the city has a breed band, the the person would have to go to the city to show that they have an assistance animal. They have breed bans do not apply to assistance animals. However, if you're wanting to make sure that you're checking all your boxes, the person could submit documentation to that city to say they have an assistance animal, so they also don't get fined and you don't get fined, whatever the reason for it is. But the city does have to approve it, as the guidance says. If it states that they're a person with a disability with disability-related need, the guidance does say there is no breed bans. If there is any pushback from the city, then you could contact us, or the tenant could contact us or their local fair housing center to work with them through that. But it kind of has to go through those processes. However, you also cannot have a breed ban as well.
Another question is there a weight limit on what's allowed? I think this is concerning assistance animals.
Yeah. So again, the guidance really calls out no weight limits, no pet policies do not apply.
Is there a difference between ESA and service animals when it comes to the terms of fair housing? I think we covered that a few slides ago, but
they're both covered under fair housing.
If someone has a assistance animal dog, do we make them take the dog to where we make other dogs go to the bathroom, or do we have to accommodate them and let the dogs go to the bathroom anywhere?
I think it depends on the circumstances of the person with the disability, and maybe their disability related needs. We could discuss this further with you, if you want to reach out to us. I think there's other factors to the case, that we may need to be, kind of aware of.
It's like we're getting a lot of questions. I don't know if we should move on to the next section and answer these at the end, or if we should keep going. What do you think, Bree?
I can answer some in the chat. I do want to be aware of time, so I will let Lindsay move forward. I do understand this is a very hot topic, and we do have an assistance animal training to refer to, so feel free to check that out. But I will, Liz is also behind the scenes, so her and I will try to answer some of these questions as Lindsay is presenting, but we wanted to be aware of everyone's time. Right, so I will turn it over to Lindsay to start on familial status and marital status.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bree. So to start with, we're going to dive deeper into familial status and marital status. It is unlawful to discriminate against anyone because of their familial status. Like we said earlier in the first half of this presentation, familial status refers to whether or not an individual has minor children under the age of 18 living with them. Family includes a single individual, people who are pregnant, people in the process of adopting or securing legal custody, and foster children. Marital status protects people from discrimination based on whether or not they are married. It includes single people, people who are divorced, married couples, and those who are separated. A person's marital status cannot be used to discriminate against them, specifically in the state of Michigan, which is where the protection is. Something we think about when it comes to familial and marital status protections are occupancy limits. Housing providers must comply with all applicable local laws, regulations, and financing requirements when it comes to occupancy. Housing providers should be aware of applicable occupancy standards for their properties. These can vary based on the location of where your property is located. So it's your responsibility to figure out what occupancy standards apply to your properties. You can find more information about occupancy standards linked below. We have lots of different resources about this. Although a housing provider may reasonably limit occupancy based on set standards, it's best to keep these limits out of advertising. Like we talked about earlier, you really want to focus your advertising for your housing based on the house itself and not the people. So when you state how many people can live in a unit, it could invite a discrimination claim because occupancy standards are pretty technical determinations. It might not be that simple. So it's best when you're advertising your property to really just talk about the property size. So Is it a 2-bedroom apartment? Is it a 3-bedroom single family home? Really just focus on the property rather than the people. Offering different rates based on the number of people who occupy housing can violate fair housing laws. Other violations include indicating people without kids get a preferential price and penalties for getting married. So these are things you should not do. They can violate fair housing. Now we're going to move on to discuss a bit more about protections for religion. Discrimination in housing on the basis of religion is prohibited under local, state, and federal fair housing laws. Religion protections protect against discrimination, whether someone is a member of a particular religion or no religion at all. The Fair Housing Act provides a narrow exemption for religious organizations to limit the sale, rental, or occupancy of housing to members of their own religion, as long as the housing is not operated for a commercial purpose. Additionally, advertising for such housing should include a disclaimer statement, such as, "This home does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability status, or familial status." As long as symbols or terms relating to religious holidays are secularized, they will not automatically constitute a violation of fair housing laws. Some examples of terms include Merry Christmas or Santa Claus. Statements using the legal name of an establishment that contain a religious reference or religious symbol may violate the law unless it includes a disclaimer stating they do not discriminate on the basis of any of the protected classes. It is permissible to describe services or facilities that are available at a particular housing unit, such as apartment complexes with a chapel or senior housing developments with kosher meals available. Now we will talk a little bit more about age. Discrimination based on age is prohibited under state and local fair housing laws. Age refers to biological age. As long as a person can enter into a contract, meaning they are over the age of 18 or emancipated, age cannot be used as a basis for discrimination in housing in Michigan. There are some exemptions for senior housing, exemptions for age and familial status protections that we'll talk a bit more about. In the state of Michigan, a minor, which is a person under the age of 18, is emancipated automatically in the following circumstances: when the minor is legally married, when a minor reaches the age of 18 years old, when on active duty in the armed forces of the United States, and for the purposes of consenting to medical care, a child is considered emancipated while in the custody of law enforcement if the parents cannot be located. Some examples of illegal age discrimination include condo associations limiting buyers of occupants based on age, and apartment complexes steering age groups to certain areas or buildings. So there's this example sentence that should not be used that says no one under the age of 40 years old, and then another that designates a building as under 14 building. Those are not legal under fair housing laws. But there are exemptions for certified for senior housing. So housing qualifies as senior housing if it's a dwelling that's specifically designed for and occupied by elderly persons under federal, state, or local government programs, or it's occupied solely by persons 62 and older, or it houses at least one person who is 55 or older in at least 80% of the occupied units, and adheres to a policy that demonstrates intent to house persons who are 55 or older. So those are the designations for senior housing. If it doesn't meet those designations, then it's not considered senior housing under the law. You can see more at these hyperlinked resources on this slide. There are limited protections for student status. You should check your local fair housing laws. If student status is not protected, it may not violate fair housing laws to give a preference or impose a limit as to students, as long as it's applied to all students, not just those of a traditional student age. Some examples are discounts for students or prohibiting students. But it depends on your local protections. Now we will discuss a bit more about sexual orientation and gender identity protections. Sexual orientation and gender identity are protected under HUD's Equal Access Rule, which we went into detail about earlier. They're also protected under Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and many other local communities. We discussed the Equal Access Rule earlier, but just as a refresher, this rule requires equal access to HUD housing programs without regard to a person's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. And then Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act prohibits people from being discriminated against in housing because of their actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Sexual orientation is a person's enduring physical, romantic, and/or emotional attraction to another person. It's about who you're attracted to and want to be in relationships with. Some examples of sexual orientations are heterosexual, straight, lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, asexual, pansexual, and others. Under ELCRA specifically, the definition of sexual orientation is defined as having an orientation for heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality, or having a history of such an orientation or being identified with such an orientation. So that's more of like the legal definition for sexual orientation. Gender identity is a person's internal, deeply held knowledge of their own gender. It's different than sexual orientation, and it can include gender identity labels such as man, woman, non-binary, or others. Under ELCRA, the definition of gender identity and expression is having or being perceived as having a gender-related self-identity expression, whether associated with an individual's assigned sex at birth or not. Gender expression is the external manifestations of gender expressed through a person's name, pronouns, clothing, haircut, voice, and behavior. Some examples of illegal discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity and expression could include, in this scenario, a property manager who oversees an apartment operating with HUD funding refuses to rent an apartment to a prospective tenant who's transgender because of the tenant's nonconformity with gender stereotypes. Another example of what illegal discrimination could look like is a maintenance worker employed by a housing provider subjecting a female tenant to pervasive harassment because she is a lesbian. Additional discrimination occurs when the tenant reports the harassment to the housing provider, but the housing provider fails to take action to stop the harassment. So there's multiple things there. There's harassment, which is illegal under the Fair Housing Act, and then there's discrimination that's happening, which is illegal in the state of Michigan based on sexual orientation. Another example is a leasing manager at a 55+ community rejects a male tenant's request to add his same-sex partner to his lease, stating in writing that the community only accepts married couples in unions between one man and one woman. That would be discrimination based on sexual orientation. I saw a question earlier asking if we could talk a bit more about source of income. So now that is what we're going to do. So source of income refers to where one's income comes from. Housing providers can always consider a tenant's income, such as their ability to pay rent and other financial obligations. But source of income protections prohibit housing providers from specifying or limiting the source of income they accept. These protections that were recently passed in the state of Michigan are intended to help cost-burdened and severely cost-burdened families to obtain and maintain housing. Source of income protections include properties financed by low-income housing tax credit. We'll go into that a bit more in the next slide. but also Michigan's Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, Michigan's Landlord-Tenant Act, and then we also have local protections here in our service area for source of income. So all properties financed with the low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, are required to accept vouchers as a source of income. LIHTC properties are expressly prohibited from discriminating against voucher holders. Owners are required to certify every year that they are adhering to that requirement, and state housing agencies are responsible for monitoring LIHTC property owners for their compliance. We've thrown around the word housing choice voucher a few times, or vouchers, but we just want to clarify what that means. Housing choice vouchers, rental assistance, is funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and is administered by a local public housing authority, or PHA, to help households with low income pay their rent. A tenant with a housing choice voucher pays a fixed portion of the rent, and the program pays the remainder of the rent directly to the landlord or housing provider. The HUD VASH program is a type of housing choice voucher that aids veterans who are experiencing homelessness and their families. The program also includes case management and clinical services provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs. As far as the Michigan source of income protections go, Governor Whitmer signed 5 bills that together amended both the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act and the Landlord-Tenant Act. That went into effect on April 2 of this year. These bills define source of income as including benefits or subsidy programs, including housing assistance, housing choice vouchers, public assistance, veterans benefits, Social Security, supplemental security income, and other retirement programs, and other programs administered by any federal, state, local, or nonprofit entity. They may also include other types of housing vouchers, child support, alimony, and other sources of income. Under Michigan source of income protections, housing providers are allowed to require a certain income amount to rent a unit, but they can't specify the source of said income. One source of income must be legal and ongoing, and source of income does not include income derived in an illegal manner. And under these bills that were passed, housing agencies are tasked with handling vouchers, must approve the applications within 30 days. There is an exemption to the source of income protections in Michigan for small landlords with fewer than 5 units in the state. But if a housing provider has several LLCs, operating entities, a mix of units that are privately owned, some under a corporation, etc., these are all related entities and they would not be exempt if there are more than 5. So who's covered in source of income? We kind of answered that in the last slide, but any landlord with 5 or more housing units in Michigan is covered by source of income protections in the state. Under the law, landlords of a rental unit or rental property, including the owner, the person who leases or subleases to someone, and any person authorized to exercise any aspect of management of the unit, including a person who acts as a rental agent or receives rent. So this can include property managers, rental agents, real estate agents, brokers, partnerships, corporations, associations, a whole slew of people who are covered by these protections. With these protections, it's prohibited for people to be denied or their lease to be terminated because of their source of income. Changes in price, terms, conditions, fees, privileges, or facilities or services in connection with the unit because of source of income. Some examples of prohibited actions are charging extra fees, higher deposits, higher rent because of source of income, or not providing equal access to facilities and amenities or maintenance. So those are things that you do not want to do under these protections. Other prohibited behaviors include making housing unavailable if the tenant is otherwise eligible, or representing the units as unavailable, or knowingly not including them. So some examples include telling an applicant with a VASH voucher that the unit is rented even though it's still available, and then not allowing an available unit to be seen or inspected because someone receives alimony. Those are things you shouldn't do. Some other prohibited behaviors are discouraging a rental, so requiring additional references, imposing additional or unreasonable screening criteria, or ignoring voucher payments when determining if an applicant has enough income to afford the unit. Another prohibited behavior is publishing ads or making any statement about a preference or limit. Some examples are placing an advertisement for a rental unit that says working people only or no Section 8. Another example is requiring residents to have a job or work a certain number of hours. Those are not allowed under these protections. And then at the local level, there's several areas here in our service area that have source of income protections, including the city of Grand Rapids, Holland, Kentwood, and Wyoming. In general, language referring to a person's occupation, lack of occupation, or receipt of some type of government assistance could trigger liability under these source of income protections. Local source of income protections include alimony, child support, Social Security, Section 8, and others. Some best practices around source of income protections include accepting and counting all income derived from lawful ongoing sources. Another best practice is don't express any limitation or preference about income sources or employment status in ads or any communication. Another best practice is work with the agency that administers a housing voucher or assistance in a timely manner. Updating policies and practices is needed to enter into third-party agreements or accepting third-party payments. Providing equal treatment to all applicants and tenants, regardless of their source of income. And not retaliating against applicants or tenants who are seeking to utilize or enforce their fair housing rights. So I'm not sure if we've received any specific questions on source of income.
We have received one. Well, we have the one about the person that asked, can you talk more about source of income? It looks like it does not protect temporary employment, just program support. Lindsay kind of covered that. It protects the type of the source of income. So where is that money coming from? From our understanding, it would, it would protect, temporary employment as well. If a person has a voucher, but an apartment requires 3 times the rent as income, under those protections is 3 times the rent based on the portion of the rent or the full amount. Our understanding, it is based on their portion of the rent.
Hey, I think that's all the questions I'm seeing about source of income.
Yes.
So I will turn it over to you, Bree, to talk a little bit more about best practices generally for rental professionals.
Thanks. So, with best practices, it's important just to have policies in place and to apply them to everyone. That's just the general rule, but we'll dive in a little bit deeper. The first best practice, which you guys you all are doing right now, is knowing your responsibilities under fair housing law. Which fair housing laws apply based on where you are. Do you have, the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, if you're in the state of Michigan, but also what are the local ordinances? What protected classes may apply to the property based upon its location. If it is a big property management company, you need to do the work to look at all of the local ordinances within that your units are available in and making sure all your policies align with that. And that kind of goes into our next one, establish application criteria, policies, and procedures that follow the laws. Do any of them discriminate against anyone of a protected class? Are there policies or procedures that are applied differently to different to people that fall within a protected class. These are things that you should be evaluating when looking at your policies and your application criteria. Management, maintenance, and other staff should be trained on the established policies and your commitment to fair housing. Providing fair housing training like today is a good risk management strategy. Is everyone who interacts with potential applicants or current residents aware of fair housing and your policies? Everyone that is under your umbrella or who interacts with the public as your steward should be aware of fair housing and your policies as they are representing you and your company. Apply the criteria, policies, and procedures evenly and consistently across the board. Are you consistent with information about vacancies, waiting lists, qualifications, rental rates, security deposits, other fees, credit, employment, additional sources of income information, references, rebates, specials, policies, all that information, is it being consistent across the board? Is all of the staff that are interacting with those applying, giving the same information? Make sure all tenants and applicants, as well as staff, are equally aware of everything. Again, consistency is really key, and it's important to document, what you're doing to adhere to your policies and procedures. Ensure housing choice. Housing providers should not make choices about which property may meet someone's needs. People that are potential residents, particularly those with disabilities and families with children, we often do see that people are trying to do the right thing and give them the property they think would be best for them, but those people are the ones that know the best about their needs, and they should be able to choose for themselves. Fair housing is all about housing choice, and so those folks need to be able to pick, that second story or third story unit if they're a family with children, even if there is a balcony. Even if you're concerned about that, that's up to the families to decide if they want to allow or if they want to live on those floors, or with a person with a disability, assuming that they may not be able to access something because they have a disability, opens you up to fair housing risk. So offer all the available units, all of the things that the people are telling you about. If that family is saying, I don't want second or third story units, make note of that. And that is why you're only showing them those first floor units. Consider requests for reasonable accommodations and modifications based upon a disability or on a case-by-case basis. These changes may be necessary for a person to have equal enjoyment of their home. Utilize these resources we've provided, the joint statements, the guidance, our guidebooks. We also have a resource archive, with some web pages. So utilize all of the information and, evaluate the information you're given and go from there. Familiarize yourself with local occupancy standards. Again, it should be based on the local health and safety standards. Housing providers only need to know about the number of people in the unit, not anything really more. Occupancy policies should not be more strict than local standards. Are you following local health and safety standards? The guidebook that we provided walks you through that. And then refer to any of those resources that we provided, and HUD has the Keating memo, which also addresses occupancy. Assure that your property and its amenities are fully accessible to people with disabilities. There is a Fair Housing Accessibility First that has some more information on design and construction requirements. Review advertising material for fair housing implications before publishing. If you're in doubt, take it out. Describe the property, not the people, not people whom you may think the property is ideal for. Advertising under the Fair Housing Act, again, is broadly defined and includes promotional materials and newspaper, internet, and advertisement, but also verbal statements. And then we've also linked HUD's Actenberg memo that also addresses this, but you can also contact us with any questions if you are within our service area. So we are going to go through some scenarios to test your knowledge based on everything we talked about today. We'll be addressing specific situations, but again, have policies in place and apply them to everyone. So I'm going to launch some, they will be polls, but there will be a multiple choice on what to kind of do with the situation. Okay. Our first one, a 65-year-old male who has rented from you for 5 years just began using a wheelchair. He is asking that you make a reasonable accommodation for his disability by paying for a ramp so he can have easier access to his first floor unit. What do you do? It is a modification, not an accommodation. We have to see if a ramp will fit in the space out front. He should use a door off the back deck instead. How we are funded impacts who pays. This is not a reasonable request. I need a letter from a doctor stating that he has a disability and a disability-related need. It is multiple choice, so please choose all that apply. The second one, a resident who uses a rollator works with you to have ramps installed at her door and a common area where other residents and visitors use. She has requested that you maintain both ramps. What do? You ask her to maintain both ramps herself. You will maintain both of the ramps and charge her a fee to do so. She needs to maintain the ramp at her door, and we will maintain the one in the common area, and neither ramp needs to be maintained. You may have to adjust your poll screen depending how big it is to see everything. We try to make the responses short enough that they appear, but it all depends on your screen size. So I will give a little bit for folks to respond to this. But again, it is multiple choice, so please choose all that apply, and then we will go over them. Give folks about 30 seconds to a minute to respond. I'll see how everyone's answering. Okay, looks like folks are getting along answering. I see some kind of trickling in now. If you are unsure, just pop in your answers. We will review them again. This is not graded. So about 10 seconds here. Alrighty, I think we are getting to the end. So I will share the results for the first one. Somebody that is using a wheelchair is asking for a reasonable accommodation for you to pay for a ramp. The first answer, I agree with 45% of you. It is a modification, not an accommodation. However, if you do receive federal funding, it is an accommodation. Then 64% of you are correct in saying that you have to assess if it'll fit out the space, if it'll fit. It would not be appropriate to ask them to use the back door off the back deck instead, unless, the ramp in the front does not fit. However, that should not be the immediate response. Then the next response would be, assessing how you're funded impacts who pays. So again, if you are private, the tenant would have to pay for it. However, if you do receive federal funding, then that would be something that you would have to pay for. It would not be acceptable to request a letter from the doctor saying he has a disability and disability-related need, as it is apparent. He is using a wheelchair, and a ramp is a disability-related need, so it is known or apparent. So that would not be, accurate to do. Appropriate, sorry. For the second question, the resident requests with a rollator is requesting a ramp built at her door in the common area, and she has requested that you maintain both ramps. The appropriate response would be that she maintains the ramp at her door and you maintaining the one in the common area. If you are requesting her a fee to maintain both ramps, the guidance really states, it's very clear that people with disabilities should not be charged fees. So good job there. All right, we're going to go to our next one. Several weeks ago, maintenance orders were submitted by 3 Latinx tenants. You notice that more recent orders were submitted by white tenants were addressed instead. The repair orders for the Latinx tenants appear to have been ignored. How do you address this situation? Talk to staff to learn more. Provide training about equal treatment. It depends on the type of repairs, and there is no fair housing risk here. Again, multiple choice. The second one, you just got an application for a vacant unit from a Black couple with 1 child. After they leave, the white person next door stops in to ask if he can have a lease for his son. But he says he doesn't want you to rent it to someone who isn't white. What do? Take the application from his son, process the family's application because your policy is first come, first serve. Document everything that was said. Take the son's application ahead of the family and call the Fair Housing Center. So again, choose all that apply, and I'll give a few minutes here for folks to respond. Just giving you a little time reminder, about 30 seconds to a minute to respond. All right, I'm seeing the answers kind of slow down, so I'll put in your final answers about 10 seconds. All right. I'm going to share the results here. So for the first one, were maintenance orders for the Latinx tenants were not addressed, and then the maintenance orders from the white tenants were addressed instead. What is kind of the process there? Yeah, I would agree with 80% of you. Talk to the staff to learn more. And kind of jumping down to the third one, it may depend on the type of repair, but it could be really crucial to provide training about equal treatment. As we mentioned, everybody needs to be aware of the um, the situation and the fair housing laws. So, but there is fair housing risk here when we see maintenance, orders not being ignored by certain people and not others. But again, there are some other circumstances that may apply. You just got an application for a black couple and a child, and then the neighbor next door who is white, doesn't want you to rent it to someone who isn't white. If your policy is first come, first serve, 88% of you agree, process that family's application because that is your policy. You can take the application from his son, but the one that says take them ahead of the family, that would not be appropriate. Document everything that was said, and you can call us to make us aware of the situation, especially if there's harassment could be involved and things like that. If you do end up renting to the black couple, it would be important for you to document and make us aware of the situation. So good job on these ones. Moving on to our last two scenarios here. A family of four lives on the property in a 2-bedroom unit. They recently had a baby, which is their third child. The unit is 949 square feet and only holds 4 people according to local code. Their lease is not up soon. What do you do? Begin the paperwork to make them move out. If they do not ask for a larger unit, they should not be forced to relocate. It is usually reasonable to give the family at least through the end of their lease and even up until this child's second birthday to vacate the premises. Consult local ordinances and the Fair Housing Center's fact sheets and guidebooks. The next one here, you are reviewing an application from a young couple with 2 children. They appear to be qualified, but you notice that the wife has a felony conviction and just spent the last 3 years in state prison. What do? Automatically deny them, or depends on what the property's policy? And again, I will give a couple minutes here for folks to answer them. You all were quick to answer these ones, so I'll give about 30 more seconds for the remaining people who are answering these. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there, so get in your responses now. All right. So for the first one, where a family of 4, who is now a family of 5, just had a child, but their lease is not up soon, kind of what do you do? It would not be appropriate to begin the paperwork to make them move out. And if they are not asked, they do not ask for a larger unit, they should not be forced to relocate. That is correct. It has been shown by case law that it is usually reasonable to give the family at least through the end of their lease and even up until the child's second birthday to, kind of change their living situation or address it with them. The really best practice would be address it with them at the end of their lease, but it has been shown by case law to give up until the child's second birthday. And you can also consult with us and local ordinances and things like that to address the situation. And then if you're reviewing the application with from the young couple with 2 children and the wife has a felony conviction, it would be appropriate to look at what your property's policy is. Automatic denials are have fair housing risk in them, so it would not be a best practice to do so. Great job, everyone. Really hope that this was a worthwhile activity. So we're going to dive further into the discounts and perks. So when is it okay to offer specials? Discrimination under fair housing laws include the provision of inferior terms and conditions and privileges. So it would be illegal to charge higher costs for an African American couple over a white couple, and it is illegal to charge families with children higher costs. So just evaluating, the perks and specials with the protected classes in mind. And then going over testing. So housing testing is an investigative tool used to gather evidence. Volunteer testers, simulate an ordinary housing transaction for the purpose of obtaining credible and objective information about housing practices. And it can be used to investigate all types of housing and housing related services. There is a scientific measure of difference. So looking at the quality of information provided, the content information provided, and the quantity of information provided. So this is a way for fair housing centers and fair housing to review and look at the housing market. It looks at availability, price, terms and conditions, information exchange, and the treatment. There's a clear, for housing testing, there's a clear separation of roles between enforcement staff and testers. Testers receive training, and they conduct practice tests and receive follow-up training. The information is objective rather than subjective. We look at, there's forms and narratives. There's no contact between testers, so testers do not talk to each other or know each other's tests or are communicating during the test. Testers do not know what they're being tested for. They're just going in and asking the questions, and then availability, and there are side-by-side comparisons done. So here's an example of one. There is we have tester 1 who is African American and tester 2 who is white. Tester 1 was given, they both met with the same person, and the time, there was a slight difference, but nothing significant. And then the availability, tester 1 was only told about 1 bedroom, where tester 2 is told about 2 bedrooms. So right there is a difference in, there's a difference in the availability. Tester 1, the black tester, was told that there was a wait list and it was long, but the other tester was not given that information. So again, there's a difference there. The rental rates were different. However, the security deposit and application fees were the same. But then the information on what type of checks were done was also different. The tester 1 was told that there was more checks than the white tester, than tester 2. The first tester was also not told about any other specials or, perks of the housing where the second tester was. So if you looking at this, the first tester was not given the same information as the second tester, which shows there is a difference in treatment. When it comes to advertising and such, the Equal Housing Opportunity logo should be present. It indicates that to the public, the property is available to everyone under the provisions of the Fair Housing Act. There are specific requirements for the size and location, and you can find that on that link there. Additionally, fair equal housing opportunity posters are recommended to be published everywhere that housing is the public sees. This is something that if you are within our service area that we can provide to you. So please feel free to reach out. Here are some links to the MSHDA pages, the MSHDA Fair Housing page, their policy statement, compliance for rental housing. Yeah, all of the fun stuff there. So if you are a MSHDA funded property, that would be important to you. We did end 15 minutes early, so we can take some time to some questions. But please, just a reminder, each person attending today must complete the survey separately. That should be linked in your browser. It'll also be put in the chat, and certificates will only be provided to those who complete the survey. And we have 2 follow-up sessions that will dive deeper into some of these topics, as I know you guys have a lot of questions about them and we really appreciate them, and we apologize that we can't address them today. It was a 3-hour class, so we want to make sure they're getting all the basic information, but we will dive deeper on the 201 and 301 in August and September, so you can register for those. And if you have any follow-up questions, if you don't have any questions for us today, you can always reach out to us through those Lindsay and mine direct email in the beginning, or you can do the contact us email, or you can call us at extension 30, and that comes to our education outreach line. But if you would like a call back, please leave a voicemail. So we can take some questions now.
I think we have a few questions that were in the chat as well.
Yeah.
There's a question about HAP agreements. If a landlord will not sign the HAP agreement, is this in violation of the source of income bill?
Yeah, so as this source of income protections are now in place, there's a lot of learning that will be done and developed by case law, but from our understanding as that would be up for fair housing risk if you were not accepting the HAP contract or the third party agreement.
And then I think another question I'm seeing is if a landlord will not do a year lease and only do month to month, is this in violation of the source of income law?
Sorry, can you read that one more time?
Yeah, if a landlord will not do a year lease and only do a month to month, is this in violation of the source of income law?
That is a good question. That I have not seen addressed yet. So I cannot say whether or not. I think it depends if your normal policy is only to do month to month. Yeah, I'm not sure. That would be something that we can address later, or we can reach out to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights on. So feel free to email us with that question so we can address it
I
and get more
think
information.
Liz is answering. Liz is our director of education outreach. I don't know if we've said that yet, but I think she is answering in the chat and says the changes to the law do not require leases to be any specific length of time. For that question, I think that was the answer. We have some questions in the Q&A. The first question is, if a family of color experiences racism or unfair treatment from a neighbor, say in an apartment complex, after documenting the issues and concerns, is that neighbor considered for eviction?
So follow your policies on harassment. What would you do on any, follow the policies that you have in place when it comes to harassment or tenant and neighbor disputes, and follow that policy. So if you have a 3-strike policy, you would follow that policy. But definitely, it is important that you do take action that is clearly called out in guidance, that as a housing provider, you do have to do something about it. You can be held liable if you do not do something about it. And definitely reach out to us as well. It looks like Liz is also answering and typing away.
And then something else I've seen, I'm not really sure what the question is, but just about English, speaking English.
But yeah,
Not sure.
Provide some more context with that, please.
Those are the only like public questions that I'm currently seeing.
Okay. Yeah, if you don't have questions currently, feel free to reach out to us at our contact information. You can reach out to us. Thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn about fair housing. We have another one just coming in. But if that is it, if you have no other questions, you are free to log off. Just make sure that you get the link to the evaluation. We will also follow up with that link as well, but that needs to be completed by tomorrow at 5 p.m.